Hi, this is a tutorial for Lesson 8 for Course F, code.org. The instructions ask you to finish the code so that the bee can collect all of the honey and nectar. So we see some missing pieces in the code that's already been started for us. We also see something called a function, and a function is just a collection of code that you can use in a simpler form so that you don't have to write the same code every time. So this particular function is called collect row, and this function is what the bee is going to be told to do, which is to move forward twice, get nectar twice, move forward, and make honey twice, and then turn left. So this function is for this particular patch. After it turns left, it can repeat the same function again for this patch and again for this patch. So that's a total of 3 times that we want to use the collect row function. So we're going to go into our math variables, put it in our loop, and change it from 1 to 3 there. Up here, this variable gather has already been set to 2. And because each one of these values will be a 2, I can use the variable gather that's already been set in each one of those loops. There we go. Let's run the program. All right, let's move on to puzzle 2. Okay, the instructions for puzzle 2 ask you to edit your solution in one place so that the bee can collect all of the honey and nectar. So the first thing I do is examine the code in the workspace, and I notice that this is the same code from puzzle 1. But because it's asking us to edit the solution in one place, there has to be something different with what we need to tell the bee to do. So let me compare this to puzzle 1. And what I notice right away is that the bee has an extra place to travel. So instead of twice, he's going to move 3 times and collect nectar 3 times because there's a 3 here, and make honey 3 times. So what's changed is it went from 2 to 3. And in order to make this code run on this puzzle, we're going to have to change the gather variable to a 3. That's all we need to do. We don't want to change this loop because there are still only 3 sides that the bee has to complete this code. So really all you have to do is change the gather variable to a 3. Let's run it. Okay, let's move to puzzle 3. Here we have puzzle 3, and in the instructions, it asks us to use a new variable. So I'm going to look at the puzzle first and read the instructions. It says that each patch, which is sort of like each side, needs the variable to be 1 less than the patch before. So for instance, here the bee has to move 3 times, collect nectar 3 times, and make honey 3 times. After it turns, that variable is subtracted by 1. So instead of 3, now it's moving forward twice, making nectar twice, and getting nectar twice and making honey twice. On the last patch, it's moving once, getting nectar once, and making honey once. So each time you have to subtract 1 from the variable. And you can use a special variable in a math block to make that happen. So I'm going to show you where that is. We're going to pull out the set gather to variable, and we're going to put that under the collect row function. And now we need to go to the math variable and pull out this one. Right now, it's not set in the way that we want it. We want to set gather to pull out the gather variable, and then we're going to subtract 1 each time. So that was a little tricky. So it's kind of a new way to use these variables and blocks. So just take a look at it, that you're not changing anything else except you're adding in a new variable that says to every time that the variable gather is used, after it's used, you're going to subtract 1. So it starts at 3. Then the next time it runs, it's going to go to 2. Then the next time it runs, it's going to go to 1, which is how you will solve this puzzle. So let's run it. Okay, let's move on to puzzle 4. Here is puzzle 4. And the instructions ask you to edit the code to make it work for this puzzle. So what I notice is the code that is in the workspace is the same code from puzzle 3, but I need to change it. So I have to examine the puzzle and see what's different. So what I see in this puzzle is that the bee is now going in the other direction, and that the first time the bee goes on his path, he's going to move forward once and get the nectar once and make honey once. And then on the second path, that increases to 2. On the third path, it increases to 3. So I know that I can just edit this variable and change the math variable to gather +1 instead of gather -1. So I'm going to click on the arrow, change it to a plus, and that's it. Because now it's just saying that each time it runs the function, that the variable will increase, the gather variable will increase by 1. All right, let's run it. Oh no, what's wrong? What did I do wrong? All right, let's look. Set the gather variable to 3, and oh, because the gather variable has to start at 1. Whoops. All right, so if I set the gather to 1 and then increase it by 1 each time, that should work. Let's try it again. Ah, there we go. All right, let's move on to puzzle 5. Okay, for puzzle 5, the instructions ask to create your own code to solve this puzzle. So I have to use what I learned from the first 4 puzzles to help me solve this. So what I know I need to do is I have to make a function. So I'm going to drag that out, and I'm going to call it collect. You don't have to call it collect, but that's what it was called in the last puzzle. So I'm just going to replicate that. And this function is going to be all the steps that the bee needs to do on each patch, so each side. Okay, so I need to go and get a loop. I actually need 3 loops. Let's pull out, because it's going to move forward, get nectar, and make honey. So I'm going to pull out my actions. First, it's going to move forward. Then it's going to get nectar. And then the bee is going to make honey. And in this case, after the bee is done making honey, the bee is actually going to turn right instead of left, as some of the other puzzles had it turn. So we're going to add a turn right down here. Oh, I forgot that in between it needs to move forward. So in between getting nectar and making honey, it needs to move forward. So I think I like this function so far. Right now the value is at 1, so we're going to talk about that in a minute. Up at the top, I need to set my variable and use my function. So I'm going to pull out the set and pull out a variable. Oh no, I'm sorry, a math value here. And I'm just going to repeat what the other puzzles use. So I'm going to rename it to gather. And at this point, it's going to stay at the value 1 for this patch. But what we learned before is that if you see it increasing, we can use a different type of variable to adjust for that. So we'll do that in a minute. Now there's 3 sides. So I'm going to use this function 3 times, which means I need another loop. And I change the value of that to 3. And I need to now use the function that I created over here because I want the b to do it 3 times. However, I now need a set gather to button and pull out, or block, I should say, pull out this variable. And I'm going to say that I would like to set the variable gather to each time add 1. So it's going to start at 1, and then it's going to increase to 2, and then it will increase to 3 each time. Now, the last thing I have to do is put that variable over here. So the variable is set to gather, and I need to put gather in here instead of the math variable 1, so that it will follow the code and increase it by 1 each time. Get one more. All right, I think this looks good. I don't notice any mistakes right away, but it's possible. So let's run it and see what happens. Uh-oh. The move forward block here didn't work. So I think what I'll do is adjust that and put in another repeat block. Instead, put the move forward, inside that repeat block, pull out the math block, and put back in the gather. All right, so now it's going to move forward, gather. Let's reset and see the puzzle. Move forward once, get nectar once, move forward once, get honey once, and then turn right. All right, let's try it again. Oh, good, that worked. Okay, let's move on to puzzle 6. Okay, puzzle 6 is definitely getting a little trickier, but again, I'm going to look for patterns. And what I'm noticing right here is that every time the bee moves on a path, it is going to repeat a certain pattern. Maybe not the same number of times, but we can adjust for that with the variables as we've been learning. So the pattern here is kind of like steps, and it is to move forward, get nectar, turn right, move forward, make honey, turn left. And then the bee will do it one more time and then another time, so 3 times, but the variable will change. Okay, so we're going to start by creating a function. It's going to be the pattern that I just noticed, and I just want to call it collect, stairs, because it's going kind of down in a stair pattern. And now we're going to pull in some loops. We're going to need 4. We're going to each time okay, so we're just going to go over the pattern that we're observing, which is that the first thing the bee will do is move forward. The second thing the bee will do is get nectar. Now, in between these loops, after it gets nectar, it needs to turn right. Next, it will move forward again and make honey. And after it makes honey, instead of turning right, it's going to turn left. Now we're not quite done here. because we're going to have to adjust some other parts of this function in a minute. But let's go up now that we've set the function, but we're not quite done, as I said. How many times will I want it to repeat that function? 3 times. So we're going to pull in the loop here, get the function that I'm still working on called collect stairs. And I know that I'm going to set that value to 3. All right, now there's a couple things we have to do here. We know that these numbers are decreasing. The nectar is decreasing. The honey is decreasing. 3, 2, 1. But other variables are increasing, such as moving forward once on this path, but on the second path, it's moving forward twice. And third path is moving forward 3 times. So let's make a variable. Like we did before, we're going to rename it gather. And we're going to leave the value at 1. In my function, I'm now going to do something with this variable. So I'm going to pull out gather, put that here. And for getting nectar, each time it gets nectar, that reduces by 1. So we need to use a different type of a math variable here. Pull that in. And we're going to say that 4 minus gather, because gather is a value of 1. 4 take away gather, which is 1, would equal 3. So getting nectar 3 times here. And putting our gather variable here, because it's only moving forward once on the first path. Bringing in for making honey, that's going to actually be similar to the getting nectar variable. We're going to use the same one. Because making honey also decreases by 1. So putting the gather in there, variable, we're going to change this to a negative. And we're going to make this a 4 because 4 take away 1 is 3. And now we have our function looking a little better, but we have to use a similar variable in our loop here, that when it runs the function, that each time it runs the function, the value of gather will actually increase by 1. So that's a little tricky. But it's similar to what we've been practicing in the other puzzles. So for this, we're going to set gather to gather plus 1. Because as you see here, gather is used over here. It's used for move forward, and each time that increases by 1. You're going to have it move forward once, move forward twice, move forward 3 times. That's why we're using this variable here. So let's run this puzzle and see how we do. Awesome. That was pretty hard. All right, puzzle 7's the last one. Okay, last puzzle, puzzle 7. again, we're going to be looking for patterns. If there's a pattern, then we can make a function that can repeat. So what you see in this puzzle is the pattern that the bee will move forward. Once it hits the honey, it's going to make honey. The number of times, which in this case, there is a pattern. It's 1, 3, 5, 7. So the pattern there is that it's actually +2. 1 plus 2 is 3, 3 plus 2 is 5, 5 plus 2 is 7. So we see a pattern in the number of times that the bee will make honey and the number of times that the bee will make nectar. Okay, so we've observed that pattern. Let's look for a pattern in the way that the bee will move. The bee will move forward, it will turn right, move forward, turn right, move forward, turn right. So there's a move forward, turn right pattern. So I think I know what my function is going to be. So let's pull that out. I'm going to call it collect. Now there's a new loop here that you may have seen, and it's called while path ahead. So what that means is if there's nothing in front of the bee, then do whatever's inside. So in this case, if nothing's in front of the bee, I want it to move forward. So what that means is if there's an empty space, the bee will just continue to move forward. And I don't have to tell it how many times to move forward if I'm using this loop. Okay, then I'm going to need another loop because the next thing it's going to do is make honey. I'm going to get rid of this math variable because I'm going to add a different variable in there. After it makes honey, it's going to turn right and move forward. I have to add this move forward block in here because it's not going to move forward with this loop because after it makes honey and turns right, there's something in its path. So I have to tell it to move forward after it turns right. Okay, after it turns right, every time after it turns right, I want it to repeat the get nectar command. All right, so what I need now is a variable that will change because here it's a 1, 3, 5, 7. So if I know that variable is going to change, then I need to create a variable. It starts off as 1. So I'm going to set my gather variable to 1 to start. And I'm going to put that gather variable here and here. All right. However, now I have to account for the pattern and I have to tell it to repeat my function. So let's get a loop. How many times will it run this function? Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Change that to a 4. Get my function. All right, now I have to account for the pattern that's happening. And the pattern is that every time gather is used, the next time it's used, it should be gather plus 2. So let's get this set gather variable out. Let's go into our math blocks. Let's change that to our variable gather that we created. And again, what is the pattern? It is plus 2. All right, I did that pretty fast. You're probably going to have to pause this and look at the code and understand the patterns and the blocks and variables that I used. But let's run it and see what happens. All right, we did it. I know it's a little complicated, but if you look for the patterns and you understand the blocks and variables, you'll figure it out. So I hope you learned a lot about variables from this lesson and keep coding. Great job.